From the outside, Willow Creek looked like the kind of neighborhood you'd find in a real estate brochure. Rows of perfectly trimmed hedges, quiet sidewalks, and houses that all looked just different enough to avoid suspicion. People waved when they mowed their lawns. Kids rode bikes in cul-de-sacs. Barbecues happened every other weekend. For James and his wife Rachel, it had seemed like the dream they'd been chasing for years. They moved in with plans to settle down, to finally exhale. Rachel had taken to the neighborhood like a fish to water. PTA meetings, bake sales, yoga in the park. She was good at making people feel welcome. James, more reserved by nature, was content watching her shine from the porch swing with a cup of coffee in hand. Life was good. But good things in Willow Creek came with a price. And that price wore a badge reading HOA security. At first, it was little things. A warning letter for leaving their trash cans out past 7 a.m. A fine for a bird feeder not approved by HOA guidelines. Their mailbox was 2 inches too tall, according to a neon orange slip tucked inside. Rachel laughed the first few off, calling it suburban theater. "They just need to feel important," she said with a shrug. Let them play cop, but James couldn't help noticing something off. The HOA board wasn't run like any he'd dealt with before. It was almost militarized. Clipboard-carrying enforcers patrolled on foot, but they weren't volunteers. They wore tactical vests, not police, not private security either, just something in between. They drove black SUVs with tinted windows and no visible license plates. They didn't wave, they watched. One morning, James caught one of them standing on the edge of their property line, snapping photos of their garden. When he stepped outside to confront him, the man walked off without a word, not fast, not slow, just confidently detached, like he wasn't worried about consequences. "I don't like this," James told Rachel that night, staring out the window. "They're more than just a bunch of clipboard warriors." Rachel tilted her head, lips tight in thought. "They're just trying to scare people. Control is all they've got." She paused for a moment. "Don't worry, babe. I've got us covered." He wanted to believe her, but there was a calmness in her tone that wasn't reassuring. It was practiced, like someone who wasn't surprised by how power works, like someone who'd seen worse. Still, James chalked up his unease to adjustment. Every community had its quirks, right? Maybe this was just one of those tight-ship places where rules mattered more than friendliness. But then came the drone, a sleek black quadcopter that hovered directly over their backyard for nearly 5 minutes. James called the HOA. No one returned his calls. Rachel again seemed strangely unfazed. "Let them watch," she said, eyes steady. "They won't like what they find." It was the way she said it, calm but edged, like a line drawn in sand. That night, James couldn't sleep. Something about the HOA, about their creepy little patrols and silent drones, felt deeper than suburban politics. He didn't know it yet, but Willow Creek wasn't just a gated community with rules. It was a place where secrets didn't stay buried, and his wife was keeping one of the biggest ones of all. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. The letters didn't stop. If anything, they escalated. What started as minor infractions turned into full-blown accusations. One arrived accusing James of unauthorized modifications for hanging wind chimes on their back porch. Another cited excessive lawn growth, even though their grass barely reached 2 inches. The strangest came with a photo. An image of Rachel carrying a laundry basket inside, time-stamped and marked with porch use violation, personal items in public view. James stared at the letter in disbelief. "They're fining us for carrying laundry?" he said, crumpling it in his hand. What kind of surveillance operation are they running? Rachel took the paper gently from him, smoothing it out on the table. They're probing, seeing what we'll do. That's not normal, he muttered, pacing. That's not even legal. But the HOA didn't seem to care about legality. Every interaction with their enforcers reinforced that. The first time James tried to push back was at the community center. A tall, broad man in mirrored sunglasses and a tactical polo met him at the door. "You'll need to leave, sir. This meeting's not open to residents under review," the man said, voice flat and rehearsed. "Under review?" James scoffed. "For what? Owning wind chimes?" The man didn't blink. "You've been flagged. Step back, or we'll have you escorted." James backed away slowly, blood boiling. It wasn't just the threat. It was the certainty in the guy's tone. Like he wasn't worried about being questioned. Like he answered to no one. He told Rachel everything that night. And again, she barely reacted. "They're not real authority figures," she said, sipping her tea. "They're hired to scare people. Paper power. We stay smart, we stay calm." But James wasn't calm. Not anymore. He started noticing the same two SUVs parked a few houses down, engine idling for hours. Once, he saw a man in tactical gear, crouched behind a fence across the street, pretending to check his phone. James waved. The guy didn't move. The neighbors had changed too. They had stopped waving. Conversations fell quiet when James or Rachel walked by. One evening, while jogging, James passed a group of residents speaking in hushed tones outside the clubhouse. As soon as they saw him, they broke apart, avoiding eye contact. It was like they'd been warned. "You don't think they're listening to us, do you?" James asked one night, lowering his voice. Rachel didn't answer right away. She reached under the kitchen counter, opened a junk drawer, and pulled out a small black device. She flicked it on. A faint red light glowed. "This blocks RF surveillance. Within 30 feet, she said, as if she were talking about the weather. "I run it twice a night." James stared at her, stunned. "Where the hell did you get that?" Her expression didn't change. "Amazon." But James knew that was a lie. He'd never seen that thing before, and it sure as hell didn't look like something the average suburban wife kept tucked between twist ties and batteries. Still, he let it go. That week, the HOA sent a formal complaint, stating the couple had created a climate of resistance and non-compliance and would be subject to enhanced monitoring. James called the city. No help. The HOA wasn't technically breaking laws. They were operating under private contracts and covenants signed years before the couple moved in. Rachel kept calm. Too calm. "They're pushing us," she said one morning, folding laundry as if she weren't talking about psychological warfare. "But they're getting sloppy," James wanted to scream. This wasn't how normal people talked. His wife, who once panicked over a broken dishwasher, now spoke like she was assessing an enemy perimeter. And those men in black SUVs? They didn't seem so brave anymore when Rachel walked past them. "They're watching," he muttered. Rachel smiled softly, eyes hard. "Good, let them." James didn't understand what was happening, not yet. But something was coming, and deep down he suspected his wife wasn't just prepared for it. She'd been waiting for it. The first letter came folded in a plain white envelope with no return address. No official HOA letterhead, no stamps, just a single sheet of paper with the words, "Leave, or we make it worse." Typed, all caps, nothing else. James held it in his hands, reading it over and over as if it might change with each pass. "This isn't a fine. This is a threat," he muttered, his fingers tightening around the edges. Rachel glanced up from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. Her face didn't flinch. She took the letter, read it once, then slipped it into a drawer next to the phone charger. "Then we document it," she said simply. "That's all?" James stared at her. "That's all?" "Rachel, this is going way beyond HOA violations. This is criminal." She nodded slowly. "I know." He wanted her to panic, to call the police, to scream or rage the way he felt like doing, but she stayed calm. It was unnerving, as if she'd already calculated this moment days ago and it had fallen right into place. The next incident made it clear. Someone had crossed a line. James woke to find their garage door spray-painted with the word "traitors" in bold red strokes. Their trash cans had been overturned, slashed open, and their backyard gate stood wide open, latch snapped in two. James took photos. Filed a police report. Not that it mattered. The responding officer glanced at the garage, asked if they had any enemies, and left with a shrug. "Probably some bored teens," he said, ignoring the thick silence between James and Rachel. That night, James paced in the living room, staring out the window into the cul-de-sac. "This neighborhood is a damn powder keg," he said. "And you're acting like this is just a game." Rachel looked up from her book. "It's not a game, James, but it's not new to me either." He turned sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" She paused, eyes measuring. "It means I've seen these kinds of tactics before. The poking, the escalation. They're hoping we break first. Or retaliate." James ran a hand through his hair. "They vandalized our home, Rachel. They threatened us. What do we do?" Her gaze didn't waver. "We let them believe it's working." Those words sank into the silence like lead. James realized she wasn't trying to avoid a fight. She was waiting for it. That same week, another letter arrived. This one was more specific. "She doesn't belong here. You've been warned. There won't be another." James began to notice things that hadn't bothered him before. The subtle clicks on the phone, line when he made calls, the garage light flickering when no one was near the switch, a parked car with fogged windows idling across the street for hours. It was as if they were being stalked by shadows. "I think this is bigger than the HOA," James whispered one night. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, she walked to the front door, locked it, and slid a small device from under the coat rack. She pressed a button. The soft hum of white noise filled the air. "No more talking near windows," she said quietly. "Or phones, or computers." James stared at her. "How do you know all this?" Rachel finally looked at him. Really looked. Her expression wasn't scared. It wasn't even angry. It was focused. "I've been in worse places with worse people," she said. This is just a neighborhood pretending to be dangerous." She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back a few inches, just enough to see the street. "They want a reaction," she said. "Let's give them silence. For now." James felt it then. Like a tide was turning. Something had shifted. Rachel wasn't waiting to run. She was watching, preparing, and whoever was behind those threats had no idea what they had just set in motion. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky was bright and cloudless, the kind of blue that usually signaled peace. Kids were getting off school buses. Lawnmowers buzzed in the distance. But for James, time had slowed to a crawl. He was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when he heard the heavy knock. Not a neighborly tap, but a pounding that rattled the front door like a warning shot. Rachel was already on the porch. Hadn't even realized she'd stepped out. James rushed to the window just in time to see two black-clad men, vests, boots, comms in their ears, walking up the steps like they owned the property. Their faces were emotionless, movements deliberate. "Mrs. Langston," one of them said loudly, their voice projecting to the neighbors already peeking out behind curtains and hedges. "You are in direct violation of HOA Code 6-4, non-compliance with monitoring orders." Rachel didn't flinch. She stood barefoot on the wooden porch, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "This is private property," she said. "And unless you've got a warrant or a badge that means something beyond HOA cosplay, you need to leave." The shorter of the two reached for her arm. "Ma'am, we're going to have to escort you to compliance holding until this is resolved." "Don't touch her!" James shouted, throwing the front door open, but it was too late. With practiced motion, the second man grabbed Rachel's wrist and twisted it behind her back. She stumbled but didn't cry out. She didn't even resist. The first man moved in, securing her other arm as they started dragging her down the porch steps. "Stop!" James yelled, rushing toward them, but the taller one turned, hand on his belt, not quite drawing a weapon but letting the implication hang in the air. "Sir, step back, for your safety." James froze. Not because he was scared of them, though he was, but because he saw Rachel's eyes. Calm, cold, calculating. She let them take her. "What are you doing?" he shouted as she was pushed into the back of a black SUV idling at the curb. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Halverson, stood in her driveway clutching a watering can, mouth agape. Another neighbor down the street held up his phone, filming, though James doubted the footage would ever see the light of day. Rachel didn't resist. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She looked at James just once, through the tinted window before the door slammed shut. And that look, it wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was permission. As the SUV pulled away, tires crunching down the gravel-lined road, James stood frozen on the lawn. Powerless. Empty. The porch was a mess. Her mug shattered, papers scattered, a potted plant tipped over during the scuffle. It looked like a crime scene. It was a crime scene. He couldn't move. His heart was racing so fast he could barely breathe. What just happened? What the hell was this neighborhood? And why did Rachel look like she knew exactly what was coming? For the rest of the day, no one came to explain. No one answered his calls. Not the HOA office, not the city, not the county sheriff. Even the police department redirected him to civil enforcement protocols under neighborhood charter law. They'd made it sound legal, sanctioned. But James knew what he saw. Two armed men, dressed for intimidation, dragging his wife away, in front of a dozen silent witnesses. By sundown, James sat alone in their darkened living room, staring at the same drawer where she'd tucked the first threat letter. He opened it slowly. Inside wasn't just the note. It was a flash drive. Small. Black. Unmarked. He never saw her put it there. His hand shook as he held it, 1,000 questions racing through his mind. But only one stood out. Who the hell is my wife? And more importantly, what? Have they just started by taking her? The house was too quiet. That strange kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. Every creak of the floorboards under James's feet echoed louder than it should. The clock in the hallway ticked like a countdown, and he had no idea what it was ticking toward. Rachel was gone. Vanished. And the HOA wasn't answering his questions. "They said she's in compliance custody," James muttered, pacing in the living room. What does that even mean? He'd called every number on the HOA's official documents. Every one of them led to voicemail, dead ends, or robotic voices reading off policy codes. It was like the whole organization had built, itself a maze made out of rules and locked doors, and Rachel had been swallowed by it. 3 days passed. Still no word. No updates. No warrant. No arrest record. Not even a call. Out of desperation, James drove to the local police station. He showed them photos, explained everything, right down to the black SUV and the men in tactical vests. The officer at the desk frowned. "We don't have her," he said flatly. "There's no one by that name in custody anywhere in the county. Are you sure she wasn't picked up by ICE or federal?" James blinked. "What?" "She was taken off her own porch, in broad daylight, by HOA security." The officer gave a slow, unconvinced nod. "HOAs can't detain people, sir. That's illegal." James laughed, bitter and exhausted. "You think I don't know that?" He left empty-handed, heart pounding, head spinning. Every system that should have protected them had turned to mist. The law, the police, the community. It was like Rachel had never existed, except he still had the flash drive. That night James plugged it into his laptop with trembling hands. The screen went black, then flickered to life with a single folder labeled, "If they take me." Inside were documents, scans, surveillance photos, and videos, some of Rachel, some of people he didn't recognize. There were maps with red circles, license plates, and time-stamped entries that looked like she'd been tracking someone, or some people. His wife had built a dossier. James scrolled through page after page of what looked like counterintelligence files. The HOA's head of security wasn't just a contractor. He was an ex-Blackwater operative. The HOA board president had ties to a private surveillance firm out of Virginia. It wasn't a homeowners association. It was a cover, a front for something else. And Rachel had known the whole time. He found a video clip, short and grainy, of Rachel in what looked like a concrete room. She sat calmly in a folding chair, arms resting on the table in front of her. "By the time you see this," she said to the camera, "they'll have me. But you need to understand, I chose this." They've buried themselves into the cracks of suburbia, using order as a shield. What they didn't count on was someone like me living next door. James leaned back in his chair, pulse thundering in his ears. She knew. She had always known. The next morning he woke to find the SUV gone from the cul-de-sac. No more black-clad men. No surveillance. The neighbors looked different, less watchful, more confused. One even waved at him again, hesitant but genuine. Rachel hadn't come home, but she wasn't missing anymore. She was doing something. James didn't know where she was, but now, neither did the people who had taken her. And somehow, he knew that was all part of her plan. James never used to believe in gut instincts. He was a facts and figures kind of guy. Taxes, contracts, software patches. But ever since Rachel vanished, that rational part of him had been slowly eroding, replaced by an itch in his chest he couldn't shake. The flash drive had given him pieces, but no whole picture, just enough to light the fuse. That morning he drove without a plan. Just a direction, west toward the edge of the county. The highways turned to industrial streets, then to gravel access roads, and finally to a long row of anonymous storage units, the kind where people buried their secrets behind rusted roll-up doors. Unit 309. The number kept repeating in Rachel's files, embedded in metadata, written in a corner of a scanned note, even muttered in a voice memo that ended abruptly. It wasn't labeled with her name, just a fake one she used for memberships and deliveries. But when James held the ID tag against the keypad, the lock clicked open. The metal door screeched as it lifted. What he saw inside made the breath catch in his throat. There were no old boxes or dusty furniture. No forgotten holiday decorations or baby clothes. Instead, the unit was clinical, organized, prepared. On the far wall hung a rack with 3 neatly pressed black suits, tactical in design, folded to perfection. A large case sat below it, opened just enough to reveal the gleam of a dismantled firearm, the kind you didn't find in sporting goods stores. Files were stacked on a fold-out table, each labeled in Rachel's handwriting. Dozens of surveillance photos, reports, timelines. It wasn't just the HOA she'd been watching. It was a network. Names, dates, offshore accounts. Some photos showed the same HOA cops in meetings with people wearing government insignias, private security firms, even foreign military patches. Rachel hadn't been documenting harassment. She was mapping an operation, and she wasn't just a concerned wife. She was infiltrating. James sat on a metal stool, heart racing. The air inside. The unit was cold, sterile, heavy with truth. He reached for one file that looked newer than the rest. Its cover marked only with 3 letters, CIA. Inside, he found an official field operations memo. His wife's name was at the top. Not Rachel Langston, but Commander Elise Ward. The words deep cover, suburban surveillance, and unauthorized domestic interference jumped off the page. The further he read, the more it all came together. Rachel had been with the CIA for over a decade, specializing in domestic counterintelligence. When she retired, it had only been on paper. Her last known assignment had involved an HOA, shell corporation suspected of funneling data from gated communities to private intelligence buyers. The operation was considered too embedded, too politically volatile for an open takedown, so they sent in someone invisible, someone like her, his wife, his Rachel. James rubbed his temples, trying to breathe. 1,000 memories rushed back. The way she always noticed new cars on their street before he did. How she knew just what to say to make unwanted people disappear. The way she fixed their internet router in seconds, even though she'd claimed she hated technology. She hadn't just been a mom or a partner. She had been watching everything. He looked around the unit again. Nothing was rushed or panicked. She'd set all of this up long ago. A fallback. A signal for him to find when the time was right. A piece of folded paper taped to the wall caught his eye. On it, written in her handwriting, "If you're here, it means they made their move. Don't worry, I've already made mine." James swallowed hard. A strange mix of fear and awe rippled through him. The HOA had tried to intimidate a suburban mom, but they'd kidnapped a CIA field commander. And now they had no idea what kind of war they'd just started. 3 weeks after her disappearance, Rachel walked back into the neighborhood like she'd just returned from a yoga retreat. No sirens, no dramatic entrances. Just the subtle hum of a black SUV pulling into the driveway and a woman stepping out, clean, composed, her eyes hidden behind dark lenses. James was on the porch, half drunk, on a cocktail of panic and sleepless nights, and for a second he thought he was hallucinating. Then she said his name, just once. James. He dropped the coffee mug in his hand. Rachel hadn't come alone. A second vehicle pulled in silently behind hers, a nondescript black sedan. 3 men and 1 woman stepped out, all dressed like civilians, but their movements, precise, purposeful, told a different story. They didn't need to say who they were. James knew. This wasn't a visit. This was a mission. Inside the house, Rachel moved like she never left. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply hugged James tightly, whispered, "I missed you." Then, opened her laptop on the kitchen counter and got to work. "What is this?" he finally asked. She looked at him over the screen. "It's the takeback." The team had been mobilized the moment her safe word was triggered, through a burner phone planted in her pocket that transmitted her coordinates the second she was dragged away. What the HOA didn't know was that Rachel had been laying traps. For months. Not physical ones, data traps, surveillance nodes, digital bugs, ghost backups. She didn't just collect information on them. She infected their entire system, emails, meetings, payments to off-the-books contractors, even video footage of illegal detainments and unauthorized property entries. She had it all. "We're not going in guns blazing," she explained, typing rapidly. "We're going to make this surgical." The next 48 hours were a blur of coordination and calm precision. The HOA board didn't see it coming. Subpoenas arrived via federal courier. The security firm contracted to provide enforcement had their license pulled and offices raided. Several board members resigned overnight. One fled the state. Rachel stayed quiet through it all. Her calm was eerie, a slow burn kind of justice that didn't need fire, just truth, exposed at the right time in the right way. The neighbors, once too scared to speak, started talking. Whispers turned into statements. Statements turned into testimonies. People had seen things. People had experienced things. Threats, surveillance, coercion. Rachel didn't even need to convince them. She just gave them a safe space to be heard. The final blow came during a public meeting called by what remained of the HOA. News vans parked along the street. Local journalists arrived, having been tipped anonymously. Rachel took the mic, not as a wife or neighbor, but as a former field commander with proof. She presented the files, the paper trail, the audio recordings, the footage of her own detainment. And then she paused. "I played along," she said, voice steady. "I let them think I was just a mom, a housewife. But I was watching, documenting, waiting for the moment they'd cross the line. And when they dragged me from my porch, they did." Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. The board sat frozen, pale, and broken. It wasn't just reputations at risk anymore. It was prison time. That night, James watched Rachel from across the living room as she sat with her laptop, sipping tea like nothing happened. But he knew something had. The neighborhood wasn't just safe again. It belonged to them now, and the people who thought they could rule it through fear, they had no idea who they were messing with. The arrests came at dawn. Black SUVs with tinted windows rolled into the neighborhood like thunderclouds. No sirens, no blaring lights, just quiet precision. The former HOA president was pulled from his McMansion in handcuffs, still wearing his silk robe. His wife screamed until one of the agents handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside was a photo, grainy, time-stamped, of her husband shaking hands with a known defense contractor on what was supposed to be a golf retreat. By 9 a.m., the news had spread. The so-called HOA cops weren't neighborhood security at all. They were hired mercenaries contracted through a shadowy shell company tied to a massive real estate conglomerate. The entire HOA had been part of a corporate land acquisition scheme, using harassment and forced evictions to tank property values, buy up homes cheap, and flip the entire block for commercial development. The plan had worked, until they picked the wrong family. Rachel never stood at a podium or took a victory lap. That wasn't her style. But her evidence was airtight. Federal investigators found entire servers' worth of forged documents, fraudulent fines, and illegal surveillance footage hidden behind firewalled systems. Every shred of it had been silently copied and delivered to the authorities through her team's secure channels. And as the dust settled, the neighborhood took a long, collective breath. Lawn chairs returned to front yards. Porch lights glowed again at night. Kids played in driveways without wary glances toward unmarked patrol cars. The fear, once stitched into the very atmosphere, was gone. James stood on the porch, looking out at the quiet street. For the first time in months, his shoulders weren't tight. His breath came easy. The HOA signs were gone. So were the men who once threatened him for leaving his garbage bin out on the wrong day. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Rachel stepped out, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "Decaf," she said, offering one to him. "Doctor's orders." He chuckled. "You mean agent's orders." She smiled, that soft, amused kind of smile she used when she knew she was 10 steps ahead. And for the first time, James didn't feel intimidated by it. He felt lucky, grateful, proud. "You ever going to tell me how deep this goes?" he asked. Rachel looked up at the sky, eyes scanning the horizon the way she always did, like she was reading signals he couldn't see. "I already did," she said. "You just didn't know how to listen yet." They stood together in the calm that followed the storm. No more secrets, no more shadows, just 2 people who had survived hell and burned down the system that tried to control them. And finally, for the first time since they moved in, the house felt like a home. Their home. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.